Throughout human history, societies have always wrestled with a strange paradox. While we claim to admire intelligence, genius, and deep thinkers, the very same qualities are often met with suspicion, fear, and even hostility. The question is, why does society, which benefits so much from the discoveries, insights, and breakthroughs of intelligent minds, simultaneously push them away, silence them, or even punish them? The answer lies deep within the psychology of the collective and within the structures that maintain order. At its core, intelligence is disruptive. To think deeply means to see beyond appearances, to question what others accept as absolute truths, and to reveal the illusions that provide comfort to the majority. Most people live not by seeking truth, but by clinging to stability. And stability requires a set of shared beliefs, myths, traditions, unexamined assumptions that allow large groups of people to function together. When an intelligent individual questions these assumptions, they are not simply offering a new perspective. They are shaking the very foundation upon which the collective sense of reality is built. Consider Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote that most people cannot bear too much reality. They need illusions, lies, and myths to live with this sense of meaning. When someone tears away those illusions, it feels less like enlightenment and more like an attack. In that moment, the thinker becomes the enemy of the tribe. Schopenhauer observed something similar. Truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And only third, it is accepted as self-evident. This cycle shows us why intelligence so often leads to conflict with the collective. It disturbs the comfortable patterns of life. Carl Jung, too, saw this paradox clearly. He explained that individuals who dare to confront the unconscious, to shine light into the shadows of the human psyche, are often alienated. They are perceived as dangerous because they reveal what others would rather not see. To society, such a person becomes a mirror that exposes its hidden fears, hypocrisies, and contradictions. And who enjoys looking into such a mirror? Very few. It is easier to reject the messenger than to face the message. Even Aldous Huxley, in his vision of a dystopian future, warned that society would not necessarily collapse under tyranny, but under the seduction of comfort and conformity. His famous novel Brave New World portrayed a civilization that avoided suffering by drowning in pleasures, distractions, and false stability. In such a world, anyone who dares to disturb the equilibrium with truth, insight, or radical thought is cast as a threat to happiness itself. This paradox, that intelligence threatens the very structures it seeks to enlighten, explains why brilliant individuals often find themselves isolated, misunderstood, or punished. Thinkers throughout history have faced exile, censorship, ridicule, or death, not because their ideas were wrong, but because their ideas were too clear. And clarity is dangerous. Clarity cuts through illusions like a knife through fragile fabric, exposing the machinery of control, the irrationality of traditions, and the emptiness of false authority. For those who benefit from the system, such clarity is intolerable. Let us think of Socrates, condemned by Athens for corrupting the youth. What did he truly do? He asked questions. He pushed people to think for themselves rather than blindly accept what was taught. But by doing so, he threatened the collective identity of Athens. His execution was not merely about his ideas. It was about protecting the myth of stability. The same pattern has repeated countless times since. Galileo silenced for revealing a heliocentric universe. Giordano Bruno burned at the stake for daring to suggest an infinite cosmos. Again and again, society has punished those who refuse to stay silent. Why is intelligence frightening? Because it reveals the fragility of the social contract. Most people depend on the group for identity, belonging, and safety. To challenge the beliefs of the group feels like tearing away the ground beneath their feet. When a thinker speaks truth, it destabilizes the emotional security of the collective. And people do not fight primarily for truth. They fight for survival, belonging, and peace of mind. This is why, paradoxically, society can praise intelligence in abstract terms, celebrating genius as an idea, admiring philosophers or scientists once they are safely dead. But in practice, living geniuses are often marginalized. Their clarity makes people uncomfortable. Their refusal to conform makes them appear arrogant or rebellious. Their vision of reality does not match the collective dream, and thus they must be silenced, ignored, or ridiculed until either society is ready to evolve or the thinker is erased from history. Yet this fear of intelligence is not simply irrational. It serves a function. Societies are built on cohesion. Cohesion requires myths, shared values, and often illusions. If every individual constantly questioned every rule, every tradition, every authority, the result would not be harmony, it would be chaos. So, in a strange way, society needs to suppress intelligence to protect itself. The paradox deepens. Intelligence is necessary for progress, but dangerous for stability. That tension has never been resolved, and perhaps never can. The true tragedy of this paradox is that intelligence, when embraced, can liberate humanity from suffering and ignorance. But when feared, it becomes a curse for those who carry it. The thinker pays the price for daring to see too much. Their clarity isolates them, making them strangers in their own communities. They may be admired from afar, but rarely embraced in the moment. They are both revered and rejected, needed yet unwanted. In the end, society's fear of intelligence reveals its deeper fear of truth. The collective prefers the warmth of illusions to the cold clarity of reality. And so those who dare to think deeply must walk a lonely road, carrying insights that few are willing to hear. This is the paradox of society. It hungers for progress, but fears the very minds that make progress possible. Intelligence is both the light that guides humanity forward and the fire that burns those who hold it.
Throughout history, the fate of independent thinkers has been marked by struggle, alienation, and rejection. Those who dare to see the world differently often find themselves walking a lonely path. Their insights, while profound, are frequently too disruptive for the collective to accept. The thinker does not simply generate new ideas. They challenge the entire framework through which society understands itself. This act, though visionary, makes them appear dangerous to the very people they hope to enlighten. Carl Jung wrote that the one who follows their own path inevitably risks isolation. The thinker who descends into the depths of their own psyche or peers too clearly into the patterns of society often returns with truths that unsettle others. When such truths are spoken aloud, they reveal not just new possibilities, but also uncomfortable realities, hypocrisy, fear, or corruption hidden beneath the surface. For the majority, it feels easier to silence the thinker than to confront the mirror they provide. Consider Socrates, who was condemned not because of any crime in the conventional sense, but because his questions threatened the foundation of Athens' collective identity. By urging young people to question authority, tradition, and unexamined beliefs, he disrupted the fragile fabric of unity. His execution demonstrated how dangerous ideas could be perceived. Similarly, Giordano Bruno, who envisioned an infinite universe filled with countless worlds, was not only rejected but executed by fire. His vision was not wrong, it was too expansive for his time. Galileo, too, was silenced, forced to recant his discoveries because they contradicted the comfort of tradition. The thinker's tragedy lies in this tension. Their clarity arrives too soon. They see beyond the horizon before the world is ready. Their insights disrupt the stability that societies cling to, so society brands them as heretics, lunatics, or traitors. Nietzsche, who diagnosed the sickness of his age with piercing precision, was dismissed as mad. Yet his works became the foundation for countless modern philosophies. Schopenhauer, whose bleak vision of existence seemed unbearable, was ignored in his lifetime but celebrated after his death. Time and again, society proves unable to embrace radical clarity in the moment, only to later recognize its value when the danger has passed. Aldous Huxley warned that societies suppress visionaries not only through punishment, but through distraction. In a world drowning in comfort and entertainment, the radical thinker becomes irrelevant. Their voice is not silenced violently, but drowned out by the noise of conformity. This may be even crueler than execution, for it erases the thinker without ever engaging with their ideas. To be ignored is a deeper exile than to be opposed. The role of the intellectual is therefore paradoxical. They are both a beacon and a burden. They see what others cannot, but by revealing it, they risk rejection. Their presence forces society to confront its contradictions, and few welcome such confrontation. The result is that thinkers are often cast into the margins, celebrated by history, but punished by their contemporaries. They become outcasts, not because they lack value, but because their value is too destabilizing. This isolation carries a psychological cost. To be rejected by the collective means to lose the basic human comforts of belonging and acceptance. Many thinkers, prophets, and visionaries have paid the price with loneliness, despair, or madness. The burden of seeing too much, of feeling alienated from one's own community, can erode the spirit. Nietzsche's collapse into silence, Van Gogh's struggles with mental anguish, or Kafka's quiet despair all speak to the inner toll of being perpetually out of step with the world around them. Yet, despite the pain, these thinkers endure because their vision matters. They embody the tension between the present and the future. What society condemns today may be what it celebrates tomorrow. The thinker becomes a bridge, though often one that is trampled upon while it still stands. Their suffering paves the way for others to walk more freely. Their exile is the cost of progress. To live as a thinker is to accept the role of the outsider. It is to carry insights that others are not ready to hear, to bear truths that others deny, and to find meaning not in immediate acceptance, but in fidelity to what one has seen. This does not make the path easier, but it gives it purpose. The thinker is rarely rewarded in their own time, but their echo shapes the generations that follow. The fate of thinkers and outcasts reveals a fundamental truth about humanity. We fear what we do not understand, and we resist what threatens our illusions. But history also shows that the outcast of today may become the prophet of tomorrow. The very ideas once ridiculed, opposed, or suppressed may later become the cornerstones of culture, science, and philosophy. Thus, the fate of the thinker is not simply tragedy, it is the paradox of being too far ahead of the collective dream. The price of clarity is exile, but the gift of exile is vision.
Why does society so often reward blind obedience instead? To understand this, we must explore the psychology of conformity and the mechanisms that make obedience not only common, but desirable. It is not just an accidental feature of human communities, it is a built-in function of how groups survive and maintain order. The story of obedience is the story of security, belonging, and the avoidance of chaos. At the foundation of this lies a simple truth. Human beings are social animals. From the earliest tribes to modern nations, survival has depended less on individual brilliance and more on collective cooperation. When danger loomed, when resources were scarce, when enemies threatened, the group could not afford endless debate. It needed unity, coordination, and quick compliance with a shared plan. Those who questioned too much risked slowing down the group or creating division. Thus, over thousands of years, obedience to authority and conformity to the group became deeply ingrained instincts. Psychologists have demonstrated this repeatedly. The famous experiments of Solomon Asch showed that individuals will often conform to the majority opinion even when that opinion is clearly and obviously wrong. In his study, participants were asked to match the length of lines on cards. When surrounded by a group of actors who deliberately gave the wrong answer, many participants abandoned their own perception of reality and agreed with the group. What does this tell us? That belonging feels safer than being right. To stand alone with the truth feels more threatening than to join the crowd in error. Stanley Milgram's shocking obedience experiments went even further. Participants were instructed by an authority figure to administer increasingly painful electric shocks to another person who was actually an actor, not really harmed. The results revealed that ordinary people, under the pressure of authority, were willing to inflict severe pain, even lethal levels, on others. Why? Because obedience to authority seemed more important than moral responsibility. The presence of an authoritative voice relieved them of the burden of choice. "I was just following orders" becomes the shield against guilt. These studies reveal a disturbing yet essential truth. Obedience and conformity are not weaknesses in isolated individuals, they are structural features of human psychology. They evolved to hold communities together. To rebel against authority, to stand against the majority, has historically been costly. The dissenter risks isolation, exile, or even death. For most of history, being excluded from the group meant certain death. So our nervous systems are wired to equate belonging with survival. This is why we often choose conformity even when we know it is wrong. It feels safer than solitude. In modern society, this instinct is continually reinforced. Schools often reward students not for originality but for compliance, memorizing rules, following instructions, and reproducing what teachers expect. Corporations function by hierarchical structures where obedience to managers is equated with professionalism. Governments build legitimacy on the obedience of citizens, encouraging loyalty as a moral duty. Everywhere, obedience is rewarded with stability, approval, and the comfort of belonging. Conformity also satisfies an emotional hunger, the need to belong. To conform is to be accepted, praised, and validated. Social rewards, approval, recognition, even love are often contingent on compliance. A child who questions too much is seen as disruptive. An employee who refuses to follow orders is considered insubordinate. By contrast, the obedient child, the compliant worker, the loyal citizen are praised, promoted, and celebrated. In this way, the system trains us to equate obedience with goodness and to fear disobedience as dangerous. Yet there is another dimension to this psychology. Conformity and obedience allow individuals to escape the terrifying responsibility of freedom. Freedom means one must think for himself, make choices, and bear the consequences. That burden is heavy. Many prefer the comfort of following rules, trusting authorities, and dissolving into the crowd. To obey is to surrender responsibility, and in surrendering, one feels safer, lighter, less alone. The cost, however, is one's individuality, one's integrity, and sometimes one's humanity. This then is the paradox. Society rewards obedience not because it is always right, but because it is always useful. Obedience makes systems predictable. Conformity maintains social harmony, even at the expense of truth. Blind loyalty ensures survival of the group, even if it sacrifices the individual. In the balance between truth and cohesion, societies have consistently chosen cohesion. This is why obedience is glorified while intelligence that questions is punished. To understand obedience and conformity is to understand why deep thinkers, prophets, and visionaries are so often rejected. They threaten to pull individuals away from the collective dream into the cold, uncertain light of reality. But reality is frightening. Conformity feels safer. And so the wheel turns. Societies continue to punish questioning minds while showering praise on obedient ones. The tragedy is that this mechanism, while functional, can also be fatal. Blind obedience has led humanity into disasters again and again, yet it remains one of the most powerful forces shaping our world. As long as belonging feels safer than truth, society will continue to reward obedience, and as long as conformity feels like survival, those who refuse to conform will be cast out as threats. Thus, the psychology of obedience and conformity is not merely an academic subject, it is the foundation of why human history unfolds as it does, why revolutions are rare, why injustice persists, and why the individual who dares to stand alone is so often feared. It is the engine of stability, but also the seed of tragedy. To see this clearly is to understand the price we pay for the comfort of belonging. In the face of rejection, alienation, and the fear that society projects onto intelligence, there arises an essential question: is there any way out of this paradox? If society instinctively resists those who think too deeply, how can the thinker live without succumbing to despair? The answer is not found in trying to change the crowd directly, nor in bending one's mind to fit into its molds, but in discovering the quiet power of solitude and the unshakable strength of inner freedom. Solitude has long been misunderstood. For many, it feels like exile, a punishment inflicted upon those who fail to belong. Yet solitude can also be a sanctuary, a space where the noise of conformity fades and the voice of one's own spirit can be heard clearly. To embrace solitude is to recognize that the value of one's life is not determined by the applause of the many, but by the integrity of one's own vision. Nietzsche described this path in the figure of the solitary wanderer who must endure the loneliness of the mountaintop, but from that height sees the landscape more fully than those in the valley below. Carl Jung, too, emphasized the necessity of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self, even those rejected by society. This journey cannot be undertaken in the crowd. It requires withdrawal, reflection, and the courage to confront one's own depths. To follow the path of individuation means accepting that the collective may never fully understand you, and yet continuing the journey anyway. In this sense, solitude is not weakness, it is the condition of authentic growth. Inner freedom arises when one ceases to depend on external validation. The thinker learns to draw strength not from acceptance, but from alignment with truth. This does not mean the thinker becomes arrogant or dismissive of others. It means they ground their sense of worth in something deeper than the shifting tides of opinion. When truth itself becomes the compass, the disapproval of society loses its sting. Freedom is found not in changing the world's reaction, but in mastering one's own. History shows that many who endured rejection later found their true power in solitude. Kierkegaard, writing alone in Copenhagen, crafted works that would influence existential philosophy for generations, even though his contemporaries mocked him. Thoreau, retreating to Walden Pond, discovered a freedom that came not from society's approval, but from communion with nature and the self. These figures remind us that the path of solitude can be fertile ground for vision. What society interprets as exile can, in fact, be liberation. The challenge, of course, lies in bearing the emotional weight of isolation. Humans are wired for connection. The absence of acceptance can feel unbearable. Yet there is a difference between loneliness and solitude.
Loneliness is the pain of exclusion, but solitude is the strength of self-reliance. To transform loneliness into solitude requires a shift of perspective, to see withdrawal not as abandonment, but as empowerment. When this shift occurs, the thinker ceases to be a victim of rejection and becomes the guardian of an inner sanctuary. Inner freedom also means resisting the seductions of conformity. Modern life tempts us constantly with distractions, comforts, and the false promise of belonging. To think independently is to risk being labeled strange or difficult, but it is also to preserve the integrity of one's mind against forces that would dilute it. Freedom is not simply political or external, it is psychological. The refusal to let one's spirit be colonized by the expectations of the crowd. To claim this freedom is to declare that one's truth matters more than approval. The power of solitude extends beyond personal survival. It also plants the seeds of transformation for the future. While society may resist the thinker in the present, it is often the solitary insights of today that become the guiding principles of tomorrow. To endure rejection with dignity is to safeguard ideas until the world is ready to hear them. Thus, solitude is not just an escape, it is a form of preservation. It ensures that truth, though unwanted in one era, may flourish in another. To walk this path requires courage. It is easier to conform, easier to seek comfort in the crowd, easier to silence one's own doubts for the sake of belonging. But those who dare to stand apart discover a deeper kind of belonging, a belonging to themselves, to truth, and to the larger flow of history. They become free not because society accepts them, but because they no longer need its acceptance. This is the essence of inner freedom, to live in harmony with what one knows to be true, regardless of the world's response. Such freedom is not without cost. It may bring loneliness, misunderstanding, even scorn, but it also brings clarity, resilience, and peace. It transforms the thinker from a fragile exile into a stronghold of vision. When inner freedom is attained, the paradox of society loses its power. The thinker is no longer at the mercy of collective opinion. They may still be rejected, but they are not broken. They may still walk alone, but their solitude becomes strength. In this way, the way out of the paradox is not to expect society to change its instincts, but to change one's relationship to society. The crowd may continue to punish intelligence and reward obedience, but the thinker does not need to live according to its verdicts. By embracing solitude and cultivating inner freedom, they transcend the judgment of the collective. Their life gains meaning not from conformity, but from authenticity. And in that authenticity lies a power greater than any social approval. The thinker who masters solitude and inner freedom becomes unshakable. They no longer ask permission to see what they see or to speak what they know. Their truth may not be welcome today, but it will endure. In the silence of solitude, they discover the voice that no rejection can erase. In the vastness of inner freedom, they find the strength to continue, to create, to endure. And ultimately, it is this endurance that allows their vision to shape the world, long after the crowd's resistance has faded into history.